Welcome back into another episode of the Believe in Georgia Tech podcast. We're your co-hosts. That's RJ Schaefer. I'm Jackson Caldwell, coming to you on Sunday, March 9th. Have a very special guest on to talk about the ACC tournament, to talk a little football as well. So without further ado, we haven't brought guests on in a little bit. Najee hasn't made an appearance. We hadn't had anybody talk games. But we wanted to bring in a voice for Georgia Tech, a current Georgia Tech student, Rohan Raman. Rohan, welcome to the show. I know you got a lot of thoughts, but just we're glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So before we dig in, being a first-time guest, and now you're a recurring guest. Like at the drop of a hat, if we need to talk Georgia Tech, you have to be here. Just kind of give a little bit of background about yourself. Just people are going to love to hear that you're a student at Georgia Tech, but just kind of some background to yourself and all that good stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm a senior at Tech right now. It's my last year, which is crazy to say, but I've seen a lot of Georgia Tech sports, football, basketball, baseball. Those are my three favorites. But I was a sports editor for the school newspaper for about a year now. And that was a great experience. Also, just being able to go out to all those games and see how these teams have evolved over the course of my 4 years now. I think the fondest memories I have are seeing where we started in football and seeing where we are now. I mean, it was really rough when I started here. My earliest memory is the Northern Illinois game where we missed the field goal at the last second. And I looked at my friends and I was like, I knew that we had a football team. I didn't know it was going to be like this. And going through that, the transition over from the Jeff Collins era to what Keys brought to the program, that's been a lot of fun to watch. And then basketball going from Pastner to Stoudemire and seeing how the team's changed we'll see. But definitely a different look and feel to things. And so I'm really happy about the way things are trending, to be honest, across the program. Baseball has also been a ton of fun to watch in the regular season and less fun to watch when the lights start to get bright. But we're making progress, so we'll see where that leads.
Absolutely, and appreciate you coming on, taking time out of your day. I know you're getting just crazy ready for the Sixers Hawks game tomorrow, so that's the one thing I want people to remember. Nothing else he just said. Not that he's student George. He's a Sixers fan living in Atlanta, so that's interesting.
Unfortunately, I'm a Sixers fan.
Before we dive into anything else, just some regular stuff, guys. If you're watching this on YouTube, would love if you'd hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Like the video, follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Huge help to us. Love the progress we're making, and things are moving ahead. We got a lot to talk about today, but yeah, appreciate everybody's support. Just be sure to do all that. So before we get into basketball, which is of course the main thing we're going to talk about here, like it is noteworthy that spring football started this week. Obviously, me and RJ did a complete spring football preview. We've talked about how this could be the most anticipated season in like quite a long time for Georgia Tech. Like they got some marquee games. Everybody knows by now that the Colorado game got moved up a day to Friday. I'm assuming that's Friday night. Like hasn't been a time release for it, but I would assume it's Friday night. Get a chance to be in a primetime slot with getting Deion Sanders in Colorado is going to bring ratings. And you're going to get almost a standalone game for that, so that'll be big news. But spring football started this week. They've had 3 practices: Tuesday, Thursday, and yesterday. I was at all 3. Now, the media viewing is limited, so like don't expect like a 50-minute breakdown of what's going on there. Like it's just we're limited in what we can see and everything like that. But everything's getting going. We talked to Brent Key on Tuesday, talked to Buster Faulkner on Thursday, and for the first time since being hired, we did get to talk to Blake Gideon. And I thought that was an interesting conversation. It was, I did our instant reaction episode when he was hired. And one of the things I wondered was, okay, like, is he going to coach something? He coached safeties at Texas, but Corey Peoples is on the staff. Then they hired Darius Eubanks to be linebackers coach. So, like, what would that look like? And Brent Key described it as him being like a walk-around coordinator, a little bit like how he does with head coaches. He just, like, Brent Key has – when I watch him walk around at practice, he's going from offensive line to the secondary to quarterbacks. He's just going everything. And that's how Gideon does it, but obviously just with a defensive approach. And, he talked about, 1 minute of practice, he's the assistant defensive line coach with Jess Simpson. And then, he's the assistant safeties coach with Corey Peoples. And so that was interesting. And again, not a lot of just super enlightening stuff. Like some of it was coach speak, to be honest. But it was good to get to talk to him for the first time. Practice continues on Tuesday. They have a couple of practices this week, and then they, along with the Georgia Tech student we brought on today, they're hitting spring break. So it's happy times are ahead for all Yellow Jacket students. So
most definitely.
So like I said, they have 2 practices this week. Then they have time off. I think they get back on March 20. I know the next practice is like March 25th or something. So a couple weeks down the road. RJ, any thoughts? I mean, I know you kept up with press conferences and everything. I mean, any overarching thoughts for you as spring football started?
Yeah, the only thing that you mentioned that I thought was notable was that Gideon was going to be a walk-around coordinator. And with a guy that's a hire like that, where he has a ton of experience, all-American players, a lot of talent over at Texas, I like the idea of getting him involved early. You're not, putting him down 100% into a role, but you're allowing him to move around and be the defensive coordinator that he should be. So that's a lot of responsibility for him coming out of the gate. But, I like the idea of that.
Rohan, any thoughts on what's going on so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really interesting that you say he's going to be a walk around coordinator. I think that's great. I think especially my main concern about the team next year is what is this defensive line going to look like? And I know Jess Simpson has done a great job with that in the past seasons, but it's a big concern.
He's got that RJ internet.
For me.
I think we lost him.
No, he's back.
All right. But I think beyond Jordan Vanderberg, there's just a lot of questions. So I'm excited to see how he changes that. I also think that having someone like Gideon who has so much safety experience is going to be great for guys like Clayton Powell-Lee and Tay Harris. Those guys are already really talented. So when you get a coach who really understands that position and combine it with that talent, I just think that's going to be great for the secondary overall.
And not that I expected any less, but like Clayton Powell-Lee and Jordan Vanderberg spoke to us yesterday, and like they gave a glowing endorsement of Gideon. Like again, obviously, like I expect that, but like they generally do seem to really like Gideon. They both also talked about one thing I did think was pretty interesting was talking about Tyler Santucci leaving, and it did catch him off guard, but like there was no hard feelings. Like when Key talked as well on Tuesday, like there was a general sense of like they're super happy for him, and he came in, did a great job, and that parlayed into a big opportunity with one of the best organizations in the entire NFL. So like that was one thing that I did jot down and was like, well, everybody seems to be the general feeling. But like I said, practice will pick up again on Tuesday. I will be there. I will also be there on Thursday. I believe running backs coach Norville McKenzie and also new offensive analyst and assistant Brian Bohannon. I think they're both talking on Tuesday, and that'll be the first time we get to talk to Bohannon. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast knows that he was the head coach at Kennesaw State for a long time. Me and RJ talked about it a little bit. We both thought that was a strong addition to the staff. So that'll definitely be interesting. Right off the top of my head, I don't know who's talking I don't remember who's talking on Thursday. So apologies there, but anything else for football? Like anybody just want to get a hot take off their chest, or are y'all good?
I got one, and this isn't even like a spring football hot take. I just want to throw this out there because you mentioned Tay Harris, and my mind went there. He's gonna be all ACC freshman. I'm telling you, he is so next level as a safety, and seeing Gideon, having that experience with Tay Harris, with a talented guy like that, I just think there's a lot of magic that can happen.
Yep. My excitement, I'm trying to contain it, but like I'm right there with you.
For me, I feel like it's going to be actually it's two. So first, the loss of Jackson Hawes is going to be a big problem for them to figure out just because of how good he is as a blocker. Like this is one of the best blocking tight ends in the country. And I know that sounds like, oh, that doesn't really matter. It definitely does, especially when it comes to the run blocking. And that was something that was so strong for the Jackets last year. And I really, really want to see how they plan to replace that. The second thing is I really like Malachi Hosley, the transfer that they brought in at running back. I think that's going to be he's not going to come in and be the lead back. I mean, you already have a guy who's very good at that in Jamal Haynes. But this is someone who was a great player at Princeton, and really, I think is going to add a lot to this offense in terms of just having another bruiser in there to, pick up yards and keep the offense on schedule. So.
Yeah, and that's actually a good point about the tight ends. I actually asked Buster Faulkner about, losing Halls and, kind of the guys. And, he talked about, well, Brett Seither's coming back. He's still, working back from his injury. He did talk pretty glowingly about Luke Harpering and just the progress he's made. So I'm pretty excited to see, like, where that goes. I want to say Key talked about Harpering as well, just, in general. But, yeah, that was one thing I did want to ask Faulkner, just because anybody that listens to this podcast knows we talk about the importance of, tight ends and Georgia Tech scheme and everything, and just how crucial it is. And you've gone from having good blockers and having to replace them, and now you got to do it again. So we'll kind of see how that shakes things out. One last note is have been a lot of number changes. Like, that was one thing I've been getting used to. Like, Jamal Haynes is number 1 now, for anybody that doesn't know that. Bailey Stockton is number 7. Isaiah Canyon is number 4. So, like, there have been a lot of number changes. I know Key brought that up on Tuesday. He's like, look, I don't have nothing to do with that. I don't care. There's been a lot of number changes. So I was like, okay, whatever. But that I will say, like, for fans, like for the fans that watch, is like that's something I would, maybe just start looking at the roster and, like, getting the new numbers memorized, because it's taken me a little bit just to kind of, get that together. But any other football thoughts now? Are we ready to? I guess before we dive super deep into the ACC tournament, which is, again, the main topic of today's show, I guess we should address whatever the heck happened in Winston-Salem, North Carolina yesterday. That I would argue that was the worst game of the season for Georgia Tech. Like, North Florida aside, like, that was the worst game I'd seen them play in a while. Like, and I know they did lose to Boston College a couple of weeks ago, but I thought this was worse than that. Like, they just looked worse. And some of it was very similar problems. It was the offense was just gross. The shooting was just bad. There were turnovers, especially in the first half. I think at the end of the first half, they ended up having 10, and Wake Forest was able to score off of them. The 3-point differential, like, it was large there early on. And one thing, I noted down was Duncan Powell has been phenomenal for Georgia Tech this year. Like, I would not have pegged him to be the most impactful transfer addition. He didn't score. And that was very similar to the Boston College game, where I think he ended up with 3 points. Go look at how Georgia Tech's played over the past couple weeks, in their wins against Cal, beating NC State, beating Miami, winning those other games. He's been lights out. I'm not saying, like, he's the whole key to the operation, but if Duncan Powell does not play well, it's curtains. Like, it's just not going to happen. And, on a team that is, that doesn't play a lot of guys, they're only playing 6 or 7. Like, that's kind of like Captain Obvious. Like, if you don't have a game play, one guy playing well, like, that can kind of tank things. But he just does a lot for them. Whether it's on the court or just intangibles, the leadership and stuff he brings. But that was, like, one of my biggest takeaways is, like, man, if Duncan Powell does not play well, it's just really hard for Georgia Tech to win. You also got a not great game from Nate George. Nobody played well. Like, I'll just blanketly say, like, I'm not going to sit here single people out. Like, I know I kind of wanted to focus on Powell just because, like, that is kind of a trend. When he doesn't play well, it's kind of really ugly for them. But, like, nobody played well. The game was hardly ever close. Like, there was, like, the first maybe 10 minutes, like, Wake Forest really wasn't doing much on offense. Like, it wasn't like they were just exploding out of the gates, but it was Hunter Salas is a good player. They've got good players. This is mostly the same team that put a beat down on them last year. That was one of me and RJ's fondest memories as, longtime podcasters here. That was a heck of an episode to record. It's like we really did not have anything to say, and I think that was like a 5-minute episode. But it was sort of similar yesterday. Like, they ended up losing by 26 points. I'll stop blabbering about it, but, like, if y'all have any thoughts before we kind of dive into what's coming up this week, let it off your chest.
I'll just keep it brief. I was pretty surprised to see Lance Terry go 1 of 8 from 3. Like, I'm not trying to single him out again, but this is like one of the best shooters on the team, and I think that's just kind of emblematic of the fact that this is a team that doesn't really have a lot of proven shooters on it and really, really struggles to get those shots up at times. They've been shooting it better as of late, but this was just like a very bad step in the wrong direction. I will say that, I thought Ndongo had a pretty good game. I know 4 turnovers is not great, but still finished with a double-double, active on defense like he always is. And while, ultimately didn't make a difference on the final score, I think it's pretty encouraging, especially because when you look at the Virginia team they're about to play, this is a team that kind of struggles against big men. And I know he's not just doesn't have imposing size, but this is a team that's susceptible to losing in the paint. And I think seeing a good game from Ndongo, at least heading into this matchup, makes me think, okay, there's something there, and this Virginia game should be a better result. So,
yeah, and the one angle I kind of looked at this game at was, especially early when Wake Forest went on that run, my first thought was, oh, Georgia Tech's going to get back in this game. It's just one run. They were doing that all night. Like, if you go on the page, look at the top runs, 16-5 run in the first half, 25-8 run to begin the second half, and then a 14-0 run to close it out. When you play a team like that, it's complete dominance. Nobody played well. Even Wake Forest didn't even really shoot amazingly from the field. It was just more consistency, a lot less turnovers. That's what plagued the first half, and honestly was chalk for the rest of the game. But I feel like Georgia Tech, again, very, very, very streaky at times. I'm not looking at this to the future of like, oh, the Virginia game's going to be so bad. It's just I feel like Georgia Tech is due for one of these games a month. I wouldn't read into it really heavy. It just sucks having all of your heavy scorers, have a bad night shooting.
Yeah, and the other obvious thing is like they squandered an opportunity to get up to the number 7 seed.
Yeah.
After Notre Dame, I watched the end of that game. I still don't understand how Stanford let Notre Dame win that game, but Notre Dame beat Stanford, and then it was Louisville. All Louisville had to do was beat Stanford. That seemed like a little bit of a given. Like Louisville was a big favorite in that game. They ended up winning, I think, by 20. And you could have moved out of the side of the bracket where you would have had to play Duke. Now, that I'm not sitting here trying to say, well, if they'd have won, they cashed in. They're beating Louisville. But, I think everybody listening to this podcast would probably rather play Louisville than play Duke in the second round. If you have a different opinion, I definitely would love to hear it. But you squandered that opportunity to avoid Duke, get to the 7 seed. I don't really think there's a big difference between playing Virginia, who we're going to get into it in just a second, and then whoever else they could have gotten, because if they were the 7, they would have had to play the winner of Virginia Tech and Cal. I don't think either of those teams are that good, but I also don't think they're that much better or worse than Virginia. That there was a literal 5-way tie for the number 9 seed, which just shows you. I think it was Virginia, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, Pitt, and Notre Dame were all. I think it was Notre Dame. We're all tied for that number 9 spot. Virginia, who just got clobbered last night by Syracuse, is who gets it. So I guess that's where we should probably start. Look, Georgia Tech and Virginia played once this year. It was a Virginia win. The one thing I will point out about that game, and I know Georgia Tech has struggled with Virginia. I don't have to tell anybody that follows Georgia Tech anything about that as far as basketball. It's just historically been a struggle with Virginia. They lost earlier this year, I believe, by 14 points. And the couple of the larger takeaways I had from that game was it was right after the overtime win, or the triple overtime win against Clemson, and Lance Terry got hurt in the game. And so you were basically playing with 5 players against Virginia, and Virginia got hot shooting there for a little bit and ended up winning the game. I didn't have any larger takeaways than that. Tech didn't play real well, but I just thought it was notable that they were just I forget the amount of minutes exactly, but I know when me and RJ talked about the Clemson win, Duncan Powell, Nate George, and Lance Terry and Brian Dongo were all just played an insane amount of minutes, and then having to go on the road to Charlottesville, which is, again, historically a place where Georgia Tech just had a lot of success. It was a bad recipe, and then Terry ended up getting injured in that game. So I guess, Rohan, what stands out to you about this matchup just right offhand? Again, it's the 8-9 matchup in the second round. Georgia Tech still gets a double bye. They will play at noon on Wednesday.
Yeah, so I think first when I'm looking at this matchup, I noticed that Virginia is one of the better 3-point shooting teams in the ACC. I think they're fifth in the conference in that percentage, but they're heavily reliant on those 3-point shots. Right, this isn't a team that has multitude of different ways to score. It's really just they get those threes up and they live and die by that, right? And you kind of saw that in Syracuse against Syracuse in their last game where the shots weren't really falling, and because of that, they got outclassed. And another thing that I noticed in that matchup was Eddie Lampkin Jr. from Syracuse had a monster game against Virginia. Um, I know the Jackets don't really have anyone with those types of measurables, like 6'11", 260. Like that's just not someone we have on the roster who can really play a heavy dose of minutes and punish the Virginia matchup. But I do think it speaks to being a little susceptible in the paint, And I think when I look at this team, this is one of the better rebounding teams in the ACC. Ndongo is a great rebounder. Saware's really come along as a rebounder. So I do think that's an area where the Jackets can really push their advantage. And Virginia also sucks at rebounding. Like not to be like mean about it, but they're last in the ACC for a reason. Like this isn't a very good rebounding team. So that's a place where the Jackets need to beat them up on the boards. They did not do that against Wake Forest in their last game, and they need to do a better job of that. Otherwise, this is going to be a closer game than it should be.
Yeah, I show the exact same sentiment as you. Just looking at it, Virginia averages 29.4 rebounds per game. That is a grand total of 393rd in the country compared to Georgia Tech's 81st. It's completely abysmal numbers. And when you look at Virginia, like you were talking about how they're very streaky from three, they do beat up on bad teams fairly well. Like just looking at their schedule, they lost by 18 to Duke. They beat Pitt by 16. They beat Miami by 11. Lost to Clemson by 13. They are a very streaky team. Georgia Tech is also a very streaky team. It's so hard to pick an angle in this game because I want to say, oh, Georgia Tech's going to out-rebound them. Then again, Virginia beat them by 14 in the first matchup. It's so hard to find an angle, but I do slightly, I'm a little bit worried just because of how well they shoot the 3-point and how much dominance I guess they've had against bad teams. But there are games like we saw last night against Syracuse. It can be very rough for Virginia.
Yeah, and I think that goes to my just thesis about the ACC this year is from 8 to 15. I don't really think that there's just much of a difference, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody. It's just, is there just a monster difference between Georgia Tech and Cal? I don't think so. Georgia Tech had to literally have a tip in at the buzzer to beat them, and Georgia Tech's the 8 seed, Cal's 15 seed. But that, and just going to your point about Virginia beating up on those teams, and I'll give them a lot of credit. This is obviously not the Virginia we're used to, and I was never. I hated the style of basketball they played. It was what it was. But they won a lot with it, and you have to tip your cap to them to kind of recover from Tony Bennett kind of retiring out of nowhere and get to where they were. I do want to just tip my cap to Virginia and just kind of they really started off really bad, and I was worried that this was going to be almost like Miami's season, and just coach is gone. It's and you could tell Miami mailed it in immediately. that was one of the worst ACC teams I've ever seen. I know they won yesterday, but Virginia didn't do that. They still kept battling, and they've worked themselves all the way up to a bye. And look, they can win this game. Surely, I would not be shocked whether this goes either direction. And it's like y'all were saying with the 3-point shooting, there's no guarantee. When Tech's offense goes in a slump, it really goes in a slump. We saw it against Boston College a couple weeks ago. We saw it just 24 hours ago. If Duncan Powell, Nate George, Lance Terry, if the team just isn't shooting well and doesn't have anything going on offense, they're very susceptible to lose. Who's the player y'all are watching tomorrow? And it can be player needs to step up, could be an X factor, any of that type of stuff. RJ, I'll let you take it first. Who are you watching tomorrow?
Like we talked about, he's kind of been the X factor for the team recently. I'm going to go with Duncan Powell. Like we said, whenever Georgia Tech struggles offensively, it's because Duncan Powell can't get on, and he gets into the game. We talked about a lot. He gets into the game very heavily emotionally. So once he's on, he can ride that high for the rest of the game. But on the Virginia side, I'm looking for a guy that's very similar to Duncan Powell, is Isaac McNeely. Once he gets into a game, if he's shooting well, it's pretty rough. But if you look at their losses, like their loss against Duke and their loss against Clemson, when they lose, he's just chucking up 3-point shots and they're not falling. So again, a lot of places for Georgia Tech to find a win.
Rohan?
For me, I'd probably say on the GT side of things, I really like what Suarez has done in the last few games, especially as a rebounder.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that, this is a team that they're going to need to press advantages against. And I know RJ, you were saying this is two very streaky teams. It's hard to find the angle, and I agree with that. But I do think that the larger sample size shows that GT is a solid rebounding team, and they need to show that in this game. So I really want to. This is someone who's very young in Suarez. I think he's a freshman, redshirt freshman. Yeah. So he's he's coming along, and he's been pretty good in the last few games. In the Wake Forest game, he had 8 points, 11 rebounds, almost a double-double, led the team in rebounds on the Saturday before. This is someone who's a pretty good rebounder, a pretty young player who can show a lot. So I want to see that. On the Virginia side of things, Andrew Rode's a pretty good passer. I was looking at the last game that they played, and he had 9 assists with, I think, no turnovers against the Jackets. So almost a double-double in that game too, with 11 points. So this is someone who is a pretty good facilitator on offense. And I think, that's something that you always want to keep in mind, stopping those playmakers from really getting everyone involved and keying in on those guys so that you can rack up turnovers and get out in transition and score. Because you do have athletic guys in Ndongo, Suarez, Powell. These are all guys who can really, really take advantage of transition plays. And so if you kind of wreck the offense in that way, that's an advantage that you can press.
Yep. I mean, I'll finish this segment how I started it, just talking about Duncan Powell. To me, he's the X factor here, and he doesn't have to score 35 or 40 and get 20 rebounds. He just has to do something. Like he has to be a factor in this game, and he just wasn't yesterday, and he wasn't against Boston College, and in several of these losses, not every one of them, but several of these losses, he just doesn't have much of a role to play. I think if he can do his usual thing, I do think Georgia Tech wins the game. My confidence meter on that is about a 4. I'll be honest. I don't feel confident picking this game in either direction. I just don't. I think the two teams are slightly above average, both of them. I don't think you're looking at world beaters out of any of them. But I guess that's where I guess I'll let y'all make the picks before we kind of move on.
Sounds good.
You can go ahead.
Okay. So for this game, do you want me to predict the final score too, or just the winner?
You do both if you want to.
All right, cool. I'm gonna say, I think Tech is going to be looking to make a statement on offense after putting up 43 points in their last game. So I'm going to hope that they get better on that end. I'm going to say that Virginia is also coming into this with something to prove. This is a team that they've historically done well against, so there's going to be motivation on both sides. I'm going to say maybe 68.
Oh, 68 to nothing.
68 to something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, RJ.
I think it's going to be. I think they're going to be.
Yeah, I'm gonna. Again, I don't think this is gonna be a very strong game offensively. These are two very hot and cold offensive teams. McNeely was 1 for 6 from 3 yesterday with a few turnovers. I don't think it's gonna be very high scoring. I'm gonna say Georgia Tech can pull out a win. If they're in the clutch, I trust Nate George, I trust Ndongo, I trust Powell if he's having a good game. But I'm gonna go pretty low scoring. I'm gonna say Georgia Tech 61. Virginia 60.
Okay, so a clean sweep. Nothing could absolutely go wrong with that. Just nothing at all. All right, so the next segment we wanted to talk about was not just so much in the game, but okay, now that we're here, what does a successful ACC tournament look like for Georgia Tech? It has been an up and down season. It did not start off well, had the injuries, looked like it could have really gone south a couple months ago. But that, to their credit, they did rally and have been playing well over the last month. Like you've had a cut, like yesterday was not a great way to end the season. The Boston College loss was bad, and you've had a couple of, again, the Virginia game earlier that we talked about, coming off the Clemson loss, or the Clemson win, excuse me. But I think it's, they're 16-15. First time they've had a double bye in 4 years, since they won the whole dang thing in 2021, which, fond memories for everybody here. Like we can all, the nostalgia can set in now. But like this, they've had a pretty good season, I would say, overall in terms of what they've navigated. I guess I'll start off, as far as, what makes a successful ACC tournament. Like, I do think they need to win Wednesday. Like, to me, I think and it like this, I'm trying not to like give you like hot takes or just overarching, like, being a little over the top, but like, I just feel you go into the off season in a similar place, I guess, kind of like last year's, like you still just don't really know where exactly the program is headed. Like there have been times where it's looked like the direction has been good, but then there's like stinkers like yesterday. And it's just, some of the inconsistency and just kind of being like, okay, like, is this truly going in the right direction? Like we see some good signs, we see some bad signs, but there's still some like shrug. And it's like, I just don't know where it's going. And like, I think that question remains if you lose Wednesday. It doesn't mean that Stoudemire won't work. I just think there's just the question of, okay, like when are we going to see some like tangible progress? And, again, they've played well over the past couple months. Like me and RJ have talked about it. Like Stoudemire, I do think deserves a good amount of credit for getting this team to play well. Like what he's gotten out of Duncan Powell should be applauded. Nate George and Ndongo have both, they both did not start the season off very well. It looked like, it could be a sophomore slump type of thing. They played really well. Like, I mean, I was there for the NC State win, and when Ndongo had 29 and 17, like it was just a dominant game, like showing what he can do. I would say winning on Wednesday is like a must. Like not as far as like job security, like anything like that, or where the program's in, but like for me to consider it to be successful, I think you need to win Wednesday. Look, we all know at this point, if they win on Wednesday against Virginia, Cooper Flag and Duke are waiting for them at high noon on Thursday. Look, I don't think they're going to win that game. It's March. Anything can happen. I think I have to there should be a disclaimer. If anybody that talks college basketball wants the calendar turns March, hey, anything can happen. Like I've seen some, March Madness is one of my favorite things in the world, and I have seen some crazy crap happen. It would stun me if Georgia Tech won that game, but who knows? I think as long as you beat Virginia and you don't just get absolutely drugged through the mud Thursday, and by that I mean I like a 35, 40-point loss where it's just like a clobbering. Like it's just not remotely close. Duke looks like they're practicing almost. Like that's what you need to avoid, because even if you beat Virginia Wednesday, there is no shame in losing to Duke. Like I think anybody would admit that, even if you're a super biased fan. But I do think like you want to see some competitiveness, at least for a little bit. That's what I would consider a successful tournament run. I won't say it's a disaster if they lose Wednesday, but I do think it leaves a bit of a bad taste in your mouth for all the good you've done over the past couple months to leave it on the game yesterday and then losing to Virginia, the worst Virginia team in quite some time. And again, I know I've said the ACC from like 8 to 15 is not that much different, but like it is a fact. This is the worst Virginia team we've seen in a while. And to end the season on 2 straight losses to me would not be great. Not a disaster, but it just would not feel good going into year 3 of Stoudemire. I guess do you guys have any differing opinions? RJ, I'll let you go first and kind of like what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, the first thing that I look at, when looking at the season, it was kind of been the story of the season to me is the injuries. Like you lose 3 of the guys who are going to be your biggest contributors, and you don't have them going down the stretch, but you clinched a winning record, 500 record in the season at minimum. But because of the injuries, because of who you don't have in the short rotation that you've been running with, my expectations honestly are not as high as yours. Again, I would love to beat Duke. I would love to beat Virginia. I'd love to go all the dang way and make it feel like 2021 again. I'm not going to lie. I'm a realist. I don't know if it's going to happen. I would like to see a win in the first game. If not, I want it to be close. Georgia Tech 7 out of their last 10. The 3 losses have all been pretty big losses, 14, 16, over 20-point loss. I just want them to keep it close in the first game and try your best against Duke. That's about the sentiment I'm at right now.
Yeah, I don't really see anything too different from what y'all have said. I think, looking back as to where this program's headed, like last year you go 7-13 in the ACC. This year you're 10-10. Okay, that's progress that you can sell. However, I do think that you want to win this game against Virginia, not just because they're a comparable team, but also I think, Jackson, the point that you brought up earlier about ending the season on 2 straight losses, it's just a bad note to leave in people's mouths. Like, it just is. So, I think as a fan, I really want to see that progress in that sense. That we learned from, our adversity and kind of are getting better. I will say that this season, as RJ pointed out, they have dealt with a lot of injuries and they've continually fought through that about as well as you could have. So, I don't want to minimize what the season has been. I think this is definitely the most fun I've had, honestly, watching GT basketball during my time here. Not that there's much competition, but, going up against Duke and future 76er Cooper Flag, that's going to be a very, very tough game to win. And so you just got to be realistic in situations like that. Like they have Flag, they have Malawak, they have Konopal, like just hard. It's just hard. So as long as you're competitive and it isn't embarrassing against Duke, that's great. That's all I need to see.
That's future Washington Wizard Cooper Flag to you.
Okay. All right.
So I think we all are in the same realm of like if you beat Virginia and you play. To me, I define competitive against Duke as losing by 15 or less, and I could even be talked into like if it's competitive for I don't know 25 minutes, but maybe you let things slip away a little bit and lose by 18. I'll like it depends on. I'd have to just see how the game plays out, but competitive game against Duke and just not being flat out embarrassed, I think would be a win for everyone because, if you beat Virginia, you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on you Thursday for better or for worse. Like, and that's more of my point of saying just don't just get – because a lot of people who are going to watch Duke play Thursday, if Georgia Tech beats Virginia, that's probably the first time a lot of them have seen Georgia Tech this year. You know what I'm saying? It's that – even the hardcore Duke fans, like, they saw them play Georgia Tech that one time. It was a disaster. And, but a lot of like just, this is the time a lot of people tune into college basketball. There's the casual fans, you have your hardcore fans, but a lot of people haven't seen Georgia Tech this year. And I think it's a chance to, even if you don't win, to show the progress you're making is like, hey, this is not the program it was a year ago or 2 years ago or how it's been in most of the recent history. Aside maybe from 2021. So that to me is just like, again, you're gonna have a lot of eyes on you and we'll see, but I think we're all in agreement there. So we're not gonna like preview if they beat Virginia. We're not gonna go ahead and talk just knee deep about Duke, but we did want to talk about is like what does the path look like for Georgia Tech if, and let me stress, if they were to pull an upset Thursday, is like what does the rest of it look like? So like Duke is set in stone. Like they obviously will play Duke no matter what if they win on Wednesday. If they were to upset Duke, they would play one of Wake Forest, North Carolina. Wake Forest is the number 4 seed. They get the double bye. They got that by winning yesterday and North Carolina losing. They won the 3-way tie between North Carolina and SMU. They would face one of Wake Forest, North Carolina, or in a long shot scenario, the winner of Pitt Notre Dame. So the winner of Pitt and Notre Dame tomorrow will play North Carolina in the second round, and whoever the winner between North Carolina in that game would play Wake Forest in the quarterfinals. And then the winner of that game, if I haven't lost you yet, the winner of that game will play the winner of Duke and Georgia Tech. So if Georgia Tech does, in fact, pull the biggest upset of the season and beat Duke on Thursday, they would face four possible teams. Look, split the season series with Notre Dame. They beat Pitt. They lost a very close game to North Carolina. And, yeah, we know about the Wake Forest game already. So that's where you would look in the semifinals. And then in the championship game, there's a number of possibilities. Again, if you're just going by seeding, you're almost certainly going to face Louisville or Duke. Both of them got double byes. They seem pretty likely to play each other in a semifinal matchup, which would be a lot of fun. And the good that Georgia Tech is 2-1 in games against those two teams this year. So that would be interesting. But that's kind of the path forward. Do y'all have any comments? Do y'all anything you want to say? I mean, obviously, if they are anywhere near that point, we're going to have a whole lot to say. But first things first, first part of the journey is you got to get there. So we'll see. But any comments there?
I think just to keep it simple, if they are in that spot in the first place, I think a lot has to be said about the growth that players like. I'm just gonna expect that if they are there, it's because players like Ndongo, George, Powell have really been great throughout those two games that they played, and they're going to be big forces in whoever they play in that third game. So I would say that it definitely improves my opinion on Stoudemire and where this program is heading. I'm not out on Stoudemire by any means. I'm just saying that, that would be a very significant development. And I know that's obvious, but I think that's really worth considering when you look at where this program's been in the past and where they would be if they, by some miracle, happen to beat Duke and really get to that point. But overall, I want to reiterate, no matter what happens in the Duke game, short of a complete getting blown off the floor, this is going to be a step in the right direction, I think. So.
Yeah, and I think after the Duke game, the opportunities, the possibilities just completely expand. Because honestly, the winner of the Notre Dame Pitt game, you could play one of those teams. I don't think the path is honestly that hard to where, I could see a hot Pitt team or Notre Dame team coming off a 4 overtime win, making it all the way there. Again, Notre Dame might have some fatigue.
Pitt's already beat North Carolina once this year, so it's.
And it's not
I think it's very realistic.
And I just watched Wake Forest lose last week, or maybe it's 2 weeks ago, lose by double digits to NC State. So it sounds crazy that we're talking about a 12 or 13 seed getting to the quarterfinal, or I guess the semifinals at that point. It's really not this year in the ACC.
And if Georgia Tech can beat Duke, there's already been some chaos in the bracket. What's wrong with some more?
Yeah.
And look, I don't have to look. This may be the part where people think we're getting into homer talk, and it's you're crazy if you think they beat Duke. We're not saying they will, but it's what if? And look, I should point out that lower seeds in the past few years have had success in the ACC tournament. Look, I mean, I know they fired Kevin Keats today, but NC State was a 10 seed last year. They won the whole freaking thing and then got to the Final Four, that's probably the most stunning run I've ever seen a team make, because NC State lost 4 in a row going into the ACC tournament. It wasn't they'd been playing well for a while and then got hot. They were playing like crap heading into the ACC tournament. Obviously, we all know they won it, and then got to the Final Four where they lost to Rohan and Zach Edey and Purdue. Biggest Zach Edey fan you'll probably find in the state of Georgia is on this podcast currently. But yeah, they lost that game. Purdue got the national title, lost to UConn. Look, I say crazy runs happen before. That's probably the craziest run ever. But go back a couple of years ago, Virginia Tech was a 7 seed. They won it. They won the entire thing. And look, that was that Virginia Tech team as a 7 seed is much better than this Georgia Tech team as an 8 seed. That Virginia Tech team had some dudes on it. But it just goes to show, teams can get hot. And, look, it's not out of the realm of possibility. Who knows? Maybe you catch Duke. Look, I'll say this. Even if Duke were to lose to Georgia Tech or Virginia, Duke is a 1 seed. There's nothing that's going to happen between now and next Sunday unless Georgia Tech won by 30. And if they win, it will not be by 30, where Duke is not a 1 seed. So you could just catch Duke, kind of nonchalant through it. I doubt that's what happens because they have a chance to be like a historically great team like that. Like they look at their advanced ratings and everything. Like they really have a chance to do something special. So I don't think that's happened, but it could. And then you don't know what kind of chaos could happen. Like I think you're faced Louisville or Clemson in the final, but if you got there, who knows? You could face Stanford or you could face I don't know who. Like it's just it's March. That's the overarching theme of this. It's March. Things can happen, and you don't have to look far back in history to see where some crazy things happen. But any thoughts just specifically on Georgia Tech before we kind of open it up?
All I'll say is I know this is a regular season game, and I know the playoffs are different and all that stuff. But last season, when they played North Carolina, number 3 seed in the country, I thought there was no chance. I remember watching that game with my roommates on the TV, and I was like, there's no way. This is not going to happen. And when George hit that last second, like I'm just saying, this is a team that has done some pretty crazy things in the past, few months. So I'm not going to predict it. I'm not going to project it, but you don't have to look very far to see this team doing some crazy things and upsetting teams that are so much better than them on paper. So that's all I'll say.
Any last thoughts on Georgia Tech, RJ?
Similar sentiment. Like Georgia Tech at its peak is a top 5 ACC team. Like we have seen, you can beat Louisville, you can beat Clemson. Go back to last year, ton of quality wins last year. At its peak, when everybody's firing, all the cylinders are going, Georgia Tech's a very good team. And I think if they catch some fire in that Virginia game, I'd be a little bit scared if I was Duke.
Somebody should clip that and just present that with zero context around it. Like just no other clip matters outside of that little 2-second clip right there. I hope somebody does that. All right, so let's open it up. We're not going to be super long here, but we'll go through each game and each matchup, and just kind of play the bracket out how we think it's going to play out. We'll start with the 10-15 matchup, Virginia Tech Cal. They played once this year. Virginia Tech won by 3. At Virginia Tech, I guess that game is just so hard. I don't know. Like Cal might be a little gassed playing. What was it, 4 overtimes against Notre Dame last night?
Yeah,
there's a chance they're a little gassed going into that game. If you buy that, just give me Virginia Tech. I think Mike Young's a really good coach. They've gotten some good wins this year. They played Louisville close a couple weeks ago. Like in matchups like these, I'll just kind of default to who I think's the better coach, and I think Mike Young's a good coach. Anybody want to go different? Anybody want to pick Cal?
I'll take Cal because Andrej Stojakovic is a ton of fun to watch. So,
I agree with you there. That's true.
I'm going to pick Virginia Tech, but Cal scares me because you look at they're all so very close losses that I think, they could flip a switch, find some games. But, yeah, I'm going with Virginia Tech. Young, talented team, and probably better coaching. So, I'm rocking with
that should be another clip. Cal scares me. All right. So, and if the winner of that game plays Stanford in the second round. So, okay, Florida State, Syracuse. I lean Florida State. They beat SMU. Florida State, I think, has some like legitimate talent on their team, and they've played some good games this year. Again, to me, this is all 3 of these first round games are complete coin flips to me. I like Florida State. I don't know where y'all sit.
Yeah, I'd probably lean Florida State in this one too.
I'd say Florida State too. I mean, they dominated Syracuse earlier.
I was like, yesterday was like by far, I think, unless I'm forgetting a game, was the best game Syracuse played. Like they took it to Virginia yesterday. So, all right. So Pitt, Notre Dame's the next one. Look, I was really high on Pitt to start the season. That has not worked out the way I thought it would. Look, Notre Dame has good guard play that can be helpful in these kind of must-win games. Again, I think Pitt has more talent. Like they were supposed to be a tournament team coming into the year. I think that wins out here. Any thoughts?
I will say that in the last Notre Dame Pitt game, they didn't have 2 of their starting backcourt, like in Shrewsbury and Aloko. Notre Dame did not have 2 of their big starters for that Pitt matchup. So, I mean, I know that Shrewsbury's out for the year, but Oloko coming back, I think that makes them a little bit more dangerous. However, I will say that I think I agree with you. Like Pitt was, I think, a possible sleeper at the start of the year. I think they're a more talented team. I think this is still going to be a game that Pitt takes.
Yeah, and I'm gonna, not to spoil my bracket, but I like Pitt in the next couple of matchups. They beat Ohio State earlier in the year. They beat North Carolina, Syracuse, West Virginia, LSU. They have a lot of quality wins. I think they're probably the best team that didn't get a bye in the ACC tournament, so I'm rocking with Pitt.
Okay. So how we'll do it the rest of the time, I'll just walk you through the rest of my bracket since we'll probably have a couple of different ones. So in the five, I guess 5-12 game, I got Pitt and North Carolina. I lean North Carolina. I think they're underwhelming. Like for the talent they have, I just don't love when I watch them. Like I just don't think that they ever hit their full potential. I like them in that game. A tough one for me is like we just watched SMU play Florida State and Florida State won. And I'm not big on SMU. Like I think they've been kind of fraudulent all year. Like they don't have any quad one wins, and they've kind of just not played well down the stretch. I'll go SMU just for that purpose. Like I think they'll win. Like again, there's not much difference between them and Florida State. Stanford, Virginia Tech. I actually thought about going upset here because again, I don't think, like I know Stanford's a higher seed, but I don't think there's much difference between those two. But give me Stanford just because Virginia Tech is also like them and Georgia Tech have like similar, like when they just go bad on offense, like they are very bad. Like Stanford will have the best player in that game. So like I lean Stanford to win that game. I already picked Georgia Tech to win against Virginia. I do not think Georgia Tech beats Duke, which, if that matchup does happen, me and RJ will be here talking about that on Wednesday afternoon. So Louisville, Stanford, I lean Louisville. Like we just watched them play. Nothing from yesterday's game made me think Stanford is going to beat Louisville, so I like that. Clemson against SMU, I lean Clemson. I'm a pretty big Clemson believer. Like I think they have like legit Sweet 16, Elite 8 upside in the tournament. Like I really like where they're at right now. So I like them to win that game. Wake Forest, Carolina will be a lot of fun, despite them pantsing Georgia Tech yesterday. I think North Carolina is a better team than Wake Forest. Like one of the reasons I thought yesterday would be closer, and I still picked Wake to win, but it's like Wake Forest just hasn't been playing that well. Like I've talked about it a couple times already. Like they did just lose by double digits to NC State, and like they've lost some questionable games this year. They're also like that. That's a bubble game if I've ever seen one. Both kind of on the outside looking in right now. Both like you're going to see desperate teams trying to win that one. I lean North Carolina. So my semifinals, yeah, I've got Duke and Carolina in the semifinals, and then I got Clemson and Louisville. That Clemson Louisville will be a ton of fun to watch again. Give me Duke and Clemson to win those games, and yeah, give me Duke. One of y'all can take it from there, but yeah, I got Duke.
Yeah, Clemson has played Duke pretty well in their matchups, but I do ultimately just lean that Duke's combination of star power and the way that those guys fit together is just hard to beat. We could dive into all the X's and O's and stuff like that we want, like all these plays and stuff, but really just talent wins. Like it just does. So I think this is just one of those cases where Duke is going to take advantage of a pretty weak ACC, and they're gonna win this bracket. So.
Okay, I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. I don't think I think there is some opportunity for lower seeds, like I talked about Pitt. I'm gonna take Pitt over North Carolina and Wake Forest to play the winner of Duke and Georgia Tech, hopefully. In that game, I'm probably gonna have them playing Duke. My heart wants me to pick Georgia Tech. I really can't do it for the sake of the clip. I know Duke fans are gonna feast on me if I say something. So I'm taking Pitt all the way to the semis, Duke to the semis. I kind of like Virginia Tech against Stanford. We kind of feel the same way. I don't think Stanford's that much better than Cal. They're very similar teams, have two very exciting scorers. I'm going to take Virginia Tech to play Louisville. I think they're going to drop that game to Louisville. FSU, SMU. You could flip a coin. I don't really care who wins this game. I think Clemson's going to beat both of them. So in my semis, I got Pitt, Duke, Louisville, and Clemson. And then, same as Jack, I got Duke and Clemson in the final, and I got Duke winning it all.
Wow. Nobody wanted to be different, but hey, Duke is good. Duke is good.
You know what? I'll pick Clemson. I'll take Clemson. I need to be a contrarian.
There we go.
Yeah.
Boy.
All right.
I'd be interested to see where Clemson would land on the seeding line if they were to win the ACC. Like, I mean, what are we talking? 3 seed probably? Because like most projections I see now have them as a 5 seed. Like, what do you bump them up to 3 maybe if they win the ACC?
Because they'd have some impressive wins. SMU's kind of a bubble team. You beat Louisville, you beat Duke. I don't know.
That'd be interesting. But this is not a Clemson podcast, so we don't care. So that's going to wrap it up for our show today. We first time guest Rohan came with us to break down the ACC tournament, give some thoughts on Georgia Tech spring football as well. Before we get out of here, guys, just make sure we would love it if you would subscribe to the channel if you hadn't already. Like the video. Tell your friends. If you have enemies, you can tell them too about the show. Maybe they want to listen to it. Follow us wherever you get your podcast. Really appreciate the support. It's come a long way. We say that a lot, but it really, it really means a lot to us. How far we've been able to come with you guys supporting it. We thank you for it. Anything else from you guys?
Oh, thank you for having me on.
And it won't be the last time. Like I said, once somebody comes on as a guest, like it's just it's a requirement to try to come back on. And who knows, maybe like we have to just an emergency. Like even if like you're in class or something, like if they beat Duke on Thursday, like it's just like get the band back together. Let's discuss it. Let's dissect it 9 ways from Sunday. Like that will be.
I'll tell you this: if they beat Duke on Thursday, I will come back for the podcast.
I know you will. Like it's voluntary. Anything else, RJ?
Yeah, and I'm not gonna use the D word, but if they beat that certain team in the quarterfinals, you best believe it's gonna be a party in Jackson, Michigan, celebrating from a ways away.
Yeah, it would be something, but we will definitely have a reaction pod to whatever the heck happens on Wednesday. Against Virginia, and then we'll preview, or maybe there's not a preview, but hopefully there is one. So appreciate you guys tuning in. Like I said, do all that stuff, and we will see you next time.